Welcome to another installment of Toxie the Night Janitor Talks. I am Toxie, and I am in fact a night janitor dedicated to sharing snippets of my opinions into the void of the interwebs. You can't stop the signal, Mal, and where the signal goes, I go, and the signal goes everywhere. In the words of Borat, wow wow wee, what a time to be alive. We have one of the most daring and surgical military maneuvers ever executed, and of course, now everyone on the internet is an expert. Me also being on the internet, I decided to give my 2 cents worth of change, perhaps a unique perspective. As an American, yes, I'm afraid so, living in Israel, yes indeed, for almost 2 years now, I have seen some of the military action from the sidelines, close by as a civilian. Thankfully, I'm in a part of Israel which is further away from Tel Aviv and the populated areas, so I'm just kind of chilling in the outback, and thankfully I haven't seen any destruction of the local community where I am. That said, in the last few days, we did go to the shelters and we did feel the force of some of the explosions from the rockets. For me, it reminded me of the tornado drills in the U.S. where I grew up. Many years ago, I can remember driving through the countryside when I lived on the farm, and I saw the aftermath of tornadoes. Buildings unscrewed like an exploded Coke can, just lying out in the fields. But of course, the attacks on Israel are not acts of nature, but rather of malice by humans. So maybe that's a genuine question for people who are opposed to Israel. What's a normal person to do? I've met many people here who are just regular people living their lives. And in fact, many foreign workers from India, China, and wherever are just working and living. Israel is actually quite diverse, something I didn't know until I arrived and looked around. People from many countries in Europe, Asia, even Africa, live and work here in Israel. Many are Jewish, some are not. So it's been quite an experience to see what life is like here. And for that reason, I am okay with disarming the Iranian nuclear program. Because a regime that not only routinely chants death to America, death to Israel, but also actively funds terror entities and attacks its neighbors and attempts to assassinate a sitting U.S. president probably isn't the nicest or easiest government to deal with. So I've been watching the news for decades, I'm now in my 4th decade of life, and I'm finally starting to see that many people who espouse ideologies on the Western political left really do not like the establishment or conservatism or the system at all. I say the Western political left because after reading about it, even on Wikipedia, and after experiencing life outside the USA for over 3 years now, the idea of political left and political right is really a Western concept that doesn't exist in many other places in the world. What strikes me is that many leftists in America, I will stick to criticizing my own country, would rather side with external entities who wish for the destruction of America as it is, rather than work with conservatives or people who admit the system in America has flaws, but it's not worth destroying outright. I think of John Kerry and his ties to Iran, for example. The leftists are fine with changing the demographics of the USA in order to get votes. Hence, open borders in USA for the 4 years before Trump's second term. While I watched all this under Biden, it just showed me that people on the left are genuinely opposed to the system in which they live at such a fundamental level that they want to destroy most, if not all of it. I actually don't wish people like this ill will, but I would rather they go somewhere else and live under the system that they love, perhaps like communist China or like the religiously ruled Iran, and see what life is like there. It just strikes me so funny that people like Bernie Sanders and Nancy Pelosi have no problem enjoying the benefits of USA capitalism, but preach communism and socialism in the name of equality. These people are multimillionaires. Where my equality at? I'm a broke white guy just scraping by as a janitor. Where my white privilege at? Why don't lefty millionaires relinquish their money to the state? Perhaps that's an infantile question, but I think you understand my point. For this reason, I just do not have much time at all for leftism anymore. I used to think that leftists were in fact well-meaning, bleeding heart liberal types, but the more I see of it, the more I realize that while that bleeding heart may be a phase, it doesn't last long. Actually, many leftists may start with a desire to help people. From there, they ascend to positions of more and more power. However, problems arise when well-meaning people are put in charge of other people's money. And although I won't go too far down the rabbit hole here in this episode, this is the reason for my absolute and utter disdain for Marxism. From what I have read and studied about Marx, he peaked in what we might call grad school with his thesis dissertation. After that, he just seemed to expect other people to support him, especially his friend, Engels. And he never even finished Das Kapital. I listened to the first chapters of Das Kapital here on YouTube in English translation. So Marx defines some terms and then proceeds to do some unit conversions between his terms. Okay, neato. Marx did like Robinson Crusoe then, though, so that was cool. He enjoyed the concept of Crusoe because he says that a few men working in a commune can direct their efforts harmoniously for the good of the commune. While this is a happy thought experiment, it really doesn't scale to larger communities. One person cannot check with 100 or 1,000 or thousands of other people before he decides to make a single overcoat. Like Zeno's paradoxes, motion can never begin at this rate. He can never start because he is too busy in committee meetings. Hence, I'll bring in some of my moral objectivist perspective and say that I'm a free market guy. Now, do absolute free markets have their own problems? Sure, no dispute. However, my main point is that I would much rather deal with the problems of a capitalistic free market society economic system than to deal with the problems of a communist socialist system. It really comes down to personal choice, personal freedom of choice. Now, does the tailor need to ask 100 or 1,000 other community members before he makes a single coat? Or should he just talk to the one person who comes into his shop and wants to buy a coat from him? If you have to check with the state before you do anything, like I said, you'll never get started. So, in a roundabout way of explanation, I suppose that's part of why I fall into the position that I am okay with Israel doing its thing with preemptive strikes. As Netanyahu said, the fight is not with the people of Iran, it is with the government. And I suppose that I must also note that we seem to have entered a new age of warfare. Drones, the internet, and social profiles have altered how people can be targeted. It seems that with such military maneuvers, such as Operation Spiderweb in Russia by Ukraine, and Rising Lion in Iran by Israel, warfare is becoming much more surgical. And I'm not really sure how to handle that. Are we happy? Are we afraid? Maybe both. I mean, it's just downright spooky to think that people, infrastructure, and vehicles can be watched and tracked in real time so that an operation may be undertaken against them at will. Now, this is probably a good thing for civilians because it allows for countries like Ukraine and Israel to minimize casualties of all kinds. The bad news is that there is no privacy for anyone anywhere. Bummer. As I said, I'm not really sure how to feel about all that. Do you want to trade privacy for convenience? That's the question. So I guess I will wrap up with a few thoughts regarding the Army's 250th birthday. I thoroughly enjoyed what I saw of the parade. It was cool to see the different units and pay respect to the history behind them. But I was disappointed to see at least one guy out of step in every other unit. Oh well. So in America, for whatever reason, it's just not a thing to do a military parade. The last military parade was held after Gulf War I in 1991, if I recall correctly. So, 24 years? I'm not really sure why, but perhaps it has something to do with the US not feeling the need to show off its military might. Often in communist countries, you might see these parades more often. I think this is meant not only to be a show of force to the rest of the world, but also to the citizens of the country. So a military parade could be a psychological warfare tool used by a communist government to send a message of power to the citizens themselves. In many countries, it's not as big a deal to think of the military being rolled out to quell civilian unrest. Consider in 2022, when Chinese tanks rolled out into the streets even after COVID in order to keep order and disperse protests. There just seems to be a mindset in the US that doesn't really allow for that. It's just a really bad look if US troops need to be deployed on US soil. I think perhaps for this reason, Trump didn't deploy the National Guard or active duty troops during his first term when the riots started after the George Floyd protests. This time, however, Trump has no problem sending the National Guard troops and active duty Marines into LA to keep order and save the federal buildings there. And what do you know? A matter of days, and the riots drop back to almost nothing. This just goes back to the problem with leftists, like Gavin Newsom, who would rather watch cities burn, quite literally, than to work with any Republicans or conservatives in order to keep the streets from falling apart. So there's my 2 cents for today. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more, and I'll catch you in the next one.